I never thought that one day, my only son and his wife would try to strip me of everything I built with my husband's sweat and my own sacrifice. The night I discovered their plan, I sat alone in my study, replaying the secret recording that would soon destroy everything they thought they could steal. What they didn't know was that the woman they were trying to outsmart had already set the trap. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I'm 67 years old. When people look at me now, calm, composed, sitting in a white rocking chair on my porch, they see a quiet widow who spends her evenings watching the sunset over Atlanta's skyline. But what they don't see is the war I had to fight to protect what my husband built from nothing. 18 months ago, I buried the love of my life, Robert Carter. We were married for 42 years, a lifetime filled with laughter, hard work, and more nights of prayer than I can count. Robert was the kind of man who could fix a broken chair, balance a business, and still hold my hand at the end of the day as if I were the only woman in the world. He started out as the son of a factory worker. No college degree, no investors, just determination and a deep belief that dignity came from labor. Together, we built a small hardware store on the edge of the city, one dusty counter, 2 racks of tools, and a dream too big for the neighborhood we started in. Robert named it Carter Home Supply, and on the day we hung the sign outside he told me, "This isn't just a store, Evelyn. It's our future. And one day, people will know the Carter name." He was right. Over 4 decades, that little store grew into a regional chain with dozens of locations across the South. Robert turned it into a $55 million empire, not through greed, but through honesty, grit, and heart. Even after all that success, we lived simply. We stayed in the same 4-bedroom house we bought when our son Marcus was born. We never flaunted our wealth. Robert always said, "Money should work quietly, not speak loudly." That sentence would one day save me. When Robert passed away after a year-long battle with pancreatic cancer, my world felt hollow. He left everything in order: investments, real estate, savings. But more than that, he left me with purpose. According to his will, I inherited most of our assets, $55 million, managed under strict legal protection. Marcus, our only child, received a $1 million trust that he could access at 35. Robert believed in teaching independence. "Let him earn his wings," he had told me once. "Then give him the wind to fly." For the first year after Robert's death, I barely touched the money. It didn't matter to me. The house was too quiet. His coffee mug sat on the counter. His cologne still lingered in the closet. I spent nights watching our old wedding tapes, listening to his voice, trying to believe he was still somehow guiding me. Marcus visited often. He brought groceries, called every day, and made sure I didn't sink into loneliness. I thanked God for him, my only child, my anchor in grief. But I didn't know then that the same son I thanked in my prayers would soon stand on the other side of a courtroom, trying to take everything away from me. It all started on a warm spring afternoon, the kind of day that made Atlanta look like a city made of gold. Marcus came by with that spark in his eyes, the one I hadn't seen since Robert's funeral. He hugged me longer than usual and said, almost shyly, "Mom, I've met someone." Her name was Vanessa Moore. He told me she worked in pharmaceutical sales, was confident, smart, and, as he put it, the kind of woman who lights up a room. I smiled politely, but inside, I felt something shift. A quiet unease. Not because I didn't want him to be happy, but because I'd seen that same light before, in people whose smiles were too perfect to be real. 2 weeks later, Marcus brought her to dinner. I remember every detail of that night. The soft jazz playing from the living room, the smell of rosemary chicken in the oven, and the faint sound of her heels on the hardwood floor before she entered. Vanessa was stunning. Mid-30s, tall, confident posture, a $1,000 watch glinting under the chandelier. "Mrs. Carter," she said warmly, shaking my hand. I've heard so much about you. Your home is charming. Her smile was polite, but her eyes moved like searchlights, over the framed photos, the antique clock, the silverware. And then she asked the question that told me everything I needed to know. Marcus mentioned your husband ran some kind of business? Carter Home Supply, right? That must have been a big success. The way she said big success wasn't admiration, it was curiosity. Financial curiosity. I replied calmly. It was his life's work. He sold it before he passed. She leaned forward just slightly, the corners of her lips curling. That must have been a very comfortable retirement for both of you. Before I could respond, Marcus interrupted, laughing it off, changing the subject to college football. But I didn't miss the flicker of irritation in her eyes when he did. That was the first red flag. After dinner, as Marcus helped me with the dishes, Vanessa excused herself to freshen up. She was gone for nearly 20 minutes. Later that night, when I went to my bedroom, I noticed the door slightly ajar. I always kept it shut. Nothing seemed disturbed, but I could feel it. Someone had been in there. Robert's words echoed in my head. Trust your gut, Evelyn. It knows the truth before your mind does. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the city lights fade into dawn, wondering if I was being paranoid, or if I was seeing the first shadow of something darker coming toward my family. But Marcus was happy. I hadn't seen him that alive in years. So I told myself to stay quiet, to be supportive. Because sometimes, love blinds us to what our instincts already know. I didn't realize then. Vanessa wasn't just after my son's heart. She was after everything tied to the Carter name. They say love takes time to build, but in Marcus's case, it arrived, bloomed, and turned into a wedding proposal before I could even catch my breath. It had been barely 3 months since that first dinner when he came over again, this time wearing that same boyish grin that used to melt me when he was a child. He placed a velvet box on my kitchen table and said softly, almost reverently, "Mom, I asked Vanessa to marry me." My heart skipped a beat. I tried to keep my voice steady, tried to smile like a supportive mother should, but my fingers tightened around my teacup. "So soon?" I asked. "You've only known each other a few months." He laughed lightly, the way people do when they're too deep in infatuation to see the edge of the cliff they're standing on. "When you know, Mom. Dad proposed to you after 6 months too, didn't he?" That sentence hit me like a soft punch, not because he was wrong, but because he was comparing love built on faith and struggle with love built on champagne and social media photos. Robert had proposed to me when we were both young, broke, and repairing old furniture in a tiny apartment that smelled like fresh paint and hope. Vanessa, on the other hand, had met Marcus at a university gala surrounded by donors and influencers. It wasn't the same, not even close. Still, I forced a smile. "I just hope she loves you for the right reasons, Marcus." He looked away. "You worry too much, Mom. Vanessa isn't like that." But my instincts whispered otherwise. A week later, Vanessa herself called me, her tone as polished as ever. "Mrs. Carter," she said cheerfully, "I wanted to go over some ideas for the wedding. I know you must be as excited as I am." Excited wasn't the word. Alarmed, maybe. But I listened. She spoke fast, too fast, as if she'd rehearsed every sentence. "We've reserved the Magnolia Estate for next month. It's a dream venue, really. Exclusive, elegant, timeless." I paused, recalling that the estate was one of the most expensive wedding venues in Atlanta. "How much will it cost?" I asked, quietly. "Just under 80,000, she said smoothly, as if she were discussing grocery bills. "Of course, we'd love to have your blessing, and perhaps a little help too. After all, this will be your son's only wedding." I stayed calm. I can contribute 25,000. The rest is for you and Marcus to handle. There was a silence on the other end, the kind that screams more than words ever could. Finally she said, "That's very kind. I'll let Marcus know." Her voice was polite, but the disappointment underneath it was razor-sharp. A few nights later, Marcus called. He sounded uneasy, almost defensive. "Mom, Vanessa's a little stressed. She thinks you don't approve of us." "It's not about approval," I said softly. "It's about values. You and your father always believed in living within your means." "Dad didn't have to deal with today's economy," he muttered. "You have the money, Mom. Why not help a little more?" That one line cut deeper than he knew. Because it wasn't just a request, it was the beginning of a transaction. My son, the boy who used to save his allowance to buy Robert a Father's Day tie, was now talking to me like a stranger asking for a loan. I ended the call politely, then sat for a long time staring at the framed photograph of Robert on the mantel. He was smiling in it, the same quiet, confident smile he wore whenever he solved a business problem. "You'd know what to do," I whispered. "You'd see through her." The weeks leading to the wedding were a blur of extravagant decisions that made my stomach churn. Vanessa ordered imported flowers from South America, a live band from New York, and a custom gown rumored to cost $10,000 alone. Every call, every text from her was about money, appearances, or perfection. Not once did she mention love. I watched as Marcus slowly changed, too. The modest man who used to wear worn leather shoes and read late into the night started wearing designer watches and talking about upgrading his car. He said Vanessa wanted them to fit in better with her circle. That's when I realized I was losing him, not to marriage, but to a performance. The night before the wedding, I stood alone in my kitchen, staring at the final payment receipt Marcus had emailed me. $25,000 transferred, my small contribution to what had become a grand illusion. The house was silent except for the ticking of the old wooden clock Robert had built. Its steady rhythm reminded me that truth, like time, cannot be rushed. It always finds its moment to strike. I didn't know how soon that moment would come. But deep inside, I felt the tension building, like a storm gathering far away, invisible yet undeniable. And by the time the first notes of the wedding march played at the Magnolia estate, that storm was already moving toward us. The morning of the wedding began with sunshine, laughter, and the faint sound of violins drifting through the open doors of the Magnolia estate, a place that looked more like a royal palace than a venue for two ordinary people. Tall marble pillars lined the entrance, the garden overflowed with roses and white orchids, and a crystal chandelier sparkled above a ballroom so polished you could see your reflection on the floor. It was breathtaking. But to me it felt hollow, a stage built for appearances, not for love. As I walked through the grand entrance in my soft lavender dress, holding the bouquet Robert once gave me, the first thing I noticed wasn't the beauty of the place, it was the extravagance. Everything screamed money. Imported table linens, champagne fountains, and designer centerpieces taller than most guests. This wasn't my son's world. This was Vanessa's kingdom. Marcus looked handsome. I won't deny that. Dressed in a tailored suit, his face glowing with nervous excitement. For a brief moment, I felt proud, even hopeful. Maybe I was wrong, maybe she really did love him. Then I saw Vanessa. She descended the grand staircase like she'd been born for the cameras. Her gown was an ocean of silk and diamonds, her veil shimmering under the light. She looked breathtaking, yes, but not because of love. It was because of attention. She carried herself not like a bride, but like a queen finally claiming her crown. When our eyes met, she smiled, not the shy, emotional smile of a bride greeting her new mother-in-law, but a slow, deliberate smirk that said, "You may have money, but now you'll see how it feels to lose control." The ceremony went smoothly, vows exchanged, kisses shared, guests clapping politely. I clapped too, But my heart wasn't celebrating. Something deep inside me was whispering again, that same cold intuition that had kept me alive in business all those years with Robert. This woman is not what she seems. At the reception, people laughed, danced, and toasted to love. I sat at the family table beside Marcus's godfather, James Foster, a quiet, retired lawyer who had been one of Robert's closest friends. He leaned closer and whispered, "She's beautiful. But there's something in her eyes I don't like, Evelyn." I sighed softly. "You see it too?" He nodded, his gaze steady. "Robert would have trusted your instincts. Keep them sharp." Those words anchored me through the night. Later, when the music grew louder and the champagne started flowing, I excused myself to get some air. The garden was glowing with fairy lights and the scent of roses. I stood by the fountain, letting the cool breeze calm me, when I heard voices, low, urgent, and unmistakably familiar. Vanessa's. She was talking to one of her bridesmaids near the hedge. Her tone was hushed but not careful enough. "Once Marcus gains control of his trust fund, the rest will be easy. She's old. She can't manage that kind of money forever." "Are you sure she'll ever give him access?" the bridesmaid asked. "Please," Vanessa scoffed. "She won't have a choice. He's her only son. If not now, then when she gets older. We'll make her see reason." Her laugh, soft, confident, and venomous, echoed in my ears like thunder. I froze where I stood, my heart beating so loudly I thought they might hear it. I wanted to step forward, confront her right there, but something inside me said no. Not yet. For the first time in my life, I understood that sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's preparation. When I returned inside, Vanessa was back on the dance floor, spinning gracefully in Marcus's arms, her laughter filling the room. Marcus looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he had ever said. He didn't see the truth. Not yet. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Toasts, laughter, speeches that sounded rehearsed. When the newlyweds left in their white limousine, waving through the window, I stood there in the golden light of the chandeliers and felt an emptiness spread through my chest. Something had changed forever. That night, I went home alone. The house felt darker than usual, heavier somehow. I placed Robert's old photograph on the dining table and whispered, "You were right, my love. Money doesn't corrupt people, it reveals them." I didn't know what was coming next, but I could feel the storm tightening around me. And by the time it finally struck, I was ready to face it, with silence, strength, and proof. Because when Vanessa Moore married my son, she didn't just join my family. She declared war on it. The wedding had barely faded from memory when the first crack appeared. Small, deliberate, and chillingly calculated. It happened just 5 days after the ceremony. I was sitting in the sunroom that morning, a cup of black coffee warming my hands as soft rain tapped against the glass. I remember thinking that for the first time in months, the house finally felt peaceful again. The guests were gone, the noise had settled, and I could finally breathe. But peace, I would soon learn, was only the calm before a hurricane. Around noon, I saw a sleek black Mercedes pull up outside the gate. The kind of car you see in movies, spotless, arrogant, and too expensive to belong anywhere humble. I assumed it was a delivery, maybe a wedding photographer dropping off prints. But when the door opened and Vanessa stepped out, dressed in a white tailored suit, designer heels clicking sharply against the pavement, and a leather folder in her hand, I felt my stomach tighten. She wasn't alone. A tall man in his 50s followed her out. Sharp gray suit, expression unreadable. A lawyer. I didn't need an introduction to know his profession. I opened the door before they even knocked. "Vanessa," I greeted coolly, "I wasn't expecting you." She smiled, that same polished, corporate smile I'd come to dread. "I'm sorry for the surprise, Mrs. Carter. This is Mr. Allen, our family attorney." Our. I repeated. She nodded, unbothered. Marcus and I just thought it was time to start arranging some things for our future. Financially. They sat across from me in the living room. The silence was suffocating. Even the grandfather clock seemed to tick louder, as if counting down to the explosion I knew was coming. Mr. Allen cleared his throat, sliding a folder toward me. Mrs. Carter, as you may know, your son has recently entered a new phase of life. Marriage, potential family planning, shared assets, all of which require financial stability. Given your substantial holdings, we believe it's appropriate to begin transferring certain funds into his name. I looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "My husband's will was very clear. Marcus has a trust fund of $1 million, available when he turns 35. That's the structure Robert designed himself." Vanessa crossed her legs slowly, tilting her head with mock sympathy. "Of course, but that was before he got married. Don't you think the circumstances have changed?" "No," I said flatly. She gave a small laugh, the kind people use when they think they're being patient with a child. "We're not asking for the world, Mrs. Carter. Just a portion. Say, 12 million. It's not much compared to what you have, and Marcus deserves to start his life with the security his father worked for." 12 million. I repeated quietly. "That's your definition of not much." Her eyes glinted like glass under sunlight. "You have 55. You won't even feel it." For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the faint sound of rain filled the room, tapping against the windows like distant applause. Then I leaned forward, folded my hands, and said calmly, "You're right about one thing, Vanessa. I won't feel it. But not because it's small, because it will never happen." The smile on her face cracked, only slightly, but enough to reveal what was beneath. Her voice hardened. "Mrs. Carter, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. We're not asking. We're informing. Marcus will have access to that money, one way or another." I looked her straight in the eye and said, "If Marcus wants something from me, he knows how to ask. He doesn't need a lawyer. Or his wife to speak for him." She gave a faint, dangerous smirk. "Oh, he knows. He just didn't want this to get emotional." Mr. Allen gathered his papers, clearly uncomfortable. "We'll give you some time to think about it," he said. "There's nothing to think about," I replied coldly. "My husband's will is law. And it will stay that way." When they left, the house fell silent again, but not the kind of silence that brings peace. It was the silence before thunder, heavy and electric. I stood by the window and watched their car disappear down the street. Vanessa didn't even glance back. That night, Marcus called. His tone was strained, distant. "Mom, Vanessa told me what happened. I just wish you'd try to understand. She's thinking about our future." "Your future," I said carefully, "was secured the day your father built this legacy. But if you think you can buy happiness, Marcus, then you didn't learn a thing from him." He sighed. "Mom, you always make things complicated." And then he hung up. I stood there, holding the phone, the dial tone humming like a warning siren. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Robert's old study, surrounded by the faint smell of his books and tobacco, staring at his framed will on the wall. He had left everything meticulously planned, every clause, every condition airtight. He'd always said, "People change when money enters the room, Evelyn. Don't ever let love blind you to motive." Those words finally made sense. Because the woman my son married wasn't building a family. She was building a case. And from that night on, I decided, if she wanted a war, she would get one. But it wouldn't be fought with shouting or tears. It would be fought with proof. That night after Marcus hung up, I sat alone in the study with Robert's photograph staring back at me from across the desk. His eyes, calm, calculating, kind, seemed to say what he always said when faced with a problem too delicate for anger. You can't fight greed with emotion, Evelyn. You fight it with strategy. So that's what I decided to do. If Vanessa and her lawyer wanted to play smart, I would play smarter. But unlike them, I wouldn't use manipulation or deceit. I would use truth, documented, recorded, and undeniable. The first step was protection. Early the next morning, I called Linda Brooks, my longtime attorney, the same woman who had handled Robert's estate years ago. Linda, I said quietly, I think my son's wife is trying to extort money from me. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then, in her calm, measured voice, Linda said, "Tell me everything." I described the meeting, the demand for $12 million, the threats, the mention of family incompetence, and how Marcus had begun siding with Vanessa. Linda didn't sound surprised. "It's more common than you'd think," she said. "Especially when the surviving spouse controls large assets. But don't worry, we'll make sure you're protected." She advised me to document everything. Every conversation, every message, every visit. Then she paused and said something that changed everything. "Evelyn, if she's as bold as you describe, she'll overplay her hand. When she does, record it. Record everything." So I did. I bought a discreet voice recorder that fit into the palm of my hand and installed small security cameras in the study and living room, the same rooms Vanessa liked to visit. I even set up an automatic backup that sent copies of every recording to a secure cloud drive, one that only Linda and I had access to. For the next 2 weeks, I waited. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't warn Marcus. I simply listened, observed, collected. And then, one afternoon, the opportunity arrived. Vanessa showed up unexpectedly while Marcus was running errands. Her smile was forced, her tone artificially sweet. "Mrs. Carter," she said, setting her designer bag on the table, "I just wanted to clear the air between us. Marcus is so stressed lately, and I think it's because he feels torn between us." I gestured for her to sit. The recorder in my pocket was already running. "Marcus is an adult," I said evenly. "He can make his own decisions." She smiled faintly, leaning forward. "Of course. But let's be honest, this isn't really about Marcus, is it? You just don't want to share what Robert left behind." Her words were calm, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. I said nothing. Just let her talk. "You've had your time," she continued smoothly. "Robert's gone. Marcus is your only family now. What good is $55 million sitting in your accounts while your son struggles to build a future?" Her tone shifted, soft to sharp in a heartbeat. "Honestly, I think you're being selfish. Do you want him to hate you? Because that's where this is heading. And when that happens, I won't stop him from fighting for what's his." I looked at her and said quietly, "You're threatening me." Her lips curved into a smirk. "I'm just being realistic." Every word was captured. Every second of her arrogance immortalized in perfect digital clarity. After she left, I immediately transferred the recording to Linda. Her response came an hour later. "Evelyn, this is gold. Don't engage further. Let them keep talking. If this goes to court, they'll bury themselves." The next few days were a blur of silent tension. Marcus kept his distance, replying to my messages with cold, clipped sentences. Vanessa, on the other hand, sent me polite texts, pretending nothing had happened. Then came the message that broke my heart. "Mom," Marcus wrote. "Vanessa says you're exaggerating. She told me you called her greedy. She's been crying all day. Please stop attacking her. We're family now." I stared at that message until my eyes blurred. It wasn't the words that hurt, it was the blind faith behind them. My son was defending the person destroying him. But even that pain had a purpose. Because blind faith only lasts until the truth shows its face. And I was preparing to rip off that mask. Slowly, publicly, and legally. A week later, I invited Marcus and Vanessa over for dinner. It was the same table where we'd celebrated his 16th birthday, where Robert had once given him a model airplane and said, "Never fly too close to greed." They came, all smiles, pretending everything was fine. Vanessa praised the meal. Marcus tried small talk. Halfway through dessert, I excused myself to get coffee, and quietly turned on the second recorder hidden in the kitchen cabinet. When I returned, I acted as though nothing was unusual. Then, as I served coffee, I looked at Vanessa and said softly, "I heard from your lawyer again. He mentioned something about guardianship." Her fork froze midair. Marcus frowned. "What's she talking about?" Vanessa forced a laugh. "He's just being proactive. You know, making sure your mom's finances are in good hands." "In good hands," I repeated, staring straight at her. "Meaning yours." Marcus looked between us, confused. "What's going on?" And that's when it happened. Vanessa snapped. She stood up, her eyes flashing with the same venom-eyed scene at the wedding. "What's going on is your mother's sitting on more money than she deserves while you work like a dog. She doesn't even trust you enough to help with your own life. And honestly, maybe someone should step in to make sure she isn't hoarding it all until she dies." Marcus went pale. I stayed quiet. Because that, too, was being recorded. The next morning, I met Linda again and handed her the new files. She listened, nodded, and said with quiet satisfaction, "She just handed us the case, Evelyn. If she makes one more move, she's finished." But it wasn't over yet. Because the storm Vanessa started was about to reach the courthouse. And when it did, every lie she'd told would be exposed, not by anger, but by evidence. They say nothing hurts more than betrayal from your own blood, and by the time we stepped into that courtroom, I finally understood what those words meant. The day began with gray skies and a cold wind that felt like it had followed me from the night before. I arrived early with my attorney, Linda Brooks, who carried 2 thick binders, one marked Evidence A and the other audio recordings. Each binder was filled with pages of transcriptions, phone logs, and recordings that told the full story of what had been done in my name, and against me. Marcus and Vanessa arrived together 15 minutes later. They looked composed, almost smug. Marcus avoided my gaze, his hand resting protectively over Vanessa's as though she were the victim. It broke my heart, because for him, this wasn't about money anymore. It was about choosing a side. The case had officially begun when Vanessa's lawyer, the same man who'd come to my home weeks earlier, filed a motion questioning my mental capacity to manage the estate left by my late husband. Their claim was that, at 67, I was overwhelmed by complex financial matters, and had possibly misinterpreted Robert's will. In plain English, they wanted me declared incompetent so that Marcus, under Vanessa's guidance, could control my assets. When I first heard the motion, my stomach dropped. But Linda had simply smiled, calm as ever. "Let them try," she said. "They don't know what you have." And she was right. The hearing began in a quiet tension that even the judge could feel. Judge Rebecca Moore, a sharp-minded woman in her early 50s, looked over the papers before glancing up. "Mrs. Carter," she began, "your daughter-in-law has petitioned this court to transfer control of your late husband's estate to your son, citing potential mismanagement. Do you understand the nature of these proceedings?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied clearly. "And I intend to prove that this petition is based on greed and manipulation, not concern." Vanessa's lawyer stood, his tone dripping with faux courtesy. With all due respect, Your Honor, this isn't about greed. It's about ensuring family wealth remains properly managed. My clients, Marcus and Vanessa Carter, only want what's fair. Linda didn't even look up from her notes when she replied. Fairness isn't determined by desire, counsel. It's determined by evidence. And we have plenty. The first half hour was painfully slow. Legal formalities, financial statements, and Robert's will, all entered into record. Vanessa sat there, her chin lifted high, occasionally whispering into Marcus's ear as if she owned him. Then Judge Moore turned to Linda. Counselor, do you have any direct evidence contradicting the petitioner's claims? Linda smiled, that kind of quiet, confident smile that meant the Betrayal show was about to begin. Yes, Your Honor. The respondent has submitted multiple audio recordings demonstrating coercion, extortion, and financial manipulation by the petitioner. Vanessa froze. Linda clicked play. The courtroom filled with Vanessa's voice, calm and condescending, from the day she'd sat in my living room. You've had your time, Mrs. Carter. Marcus is your only family now. What good is $55 million sitting in your accounts while your son struggles? Honestly, I think you're being selfish. The judge's expression darkened as the audio continued. Then came the second recording, the dinner table confrontation. Maybe someone should step in to make sure she isn't hoarding it all until she dies. The gallery gasped. Marcus's face turned white. For the first time, his perfect composure cracked. Vanessa, realizing the trap she'd walked into, shot to her feet. That was taken out of context. She's twisting. Sit down, Mrs. Carter, Judge Moore ordered firmly. Linda didn't miss a beat. Context, Your Honor, is exactly why there are hours of recordings. All voluntarily initiated by the petitioner, without provocation. She handed over the transcripts. You'll find consistent references to manipulation, deceit, and threats of legal action, none of which came from my client. The judge read for several minutes, the sound of pages turning echoing through the silent courtroom. Then she looked up at Vanessa, her tone sharp, professional, and final. Mrs. Carter, these recordings show a clear intent to manipulate and intimidate. You threatened to declare your mother-in-law incompetent to seize financial control. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Vanessa's lips trembled, but no words came out. Judge Moore turned to Marcus. Mr. Carter, were you aware of your wife's actions? Marcus's eyes darted between me and Vanessa. He looked trapped, ashamed, small. Finally he whispered, No, Your Honor. I didn't know. That was the first honest thing he'd said in months. By the time the session ended, the judge's ruling was clear. The court finds no evidence of incompetence or mismanagement on the part of Mrs. Evelyn Carter. The petition is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, the court recognizes substantial evidence of malicious intent by Mrs. Vanessa Carter, and the respondent reserves the right to pursue civil action for defamation and attempted financial exploitation. The gavel struck once, sharp and satisfying. Case closed. Vanessa's lawyer packed up silently. Marcus sat motionless, his face pale and unreadable. I stood up slowly, my knees trembling but my heart steady. As I turned to leave, Vanessa hissed under her breath. You think this is over? I looked her straight in the eyes and said quietly, No, dear. It's just beginning. Because now, the law knows exactly who you are. Outside the courthouse, the cold wind hit my face like a baptism. Linda placed a hand on my shoulder. You did good, Evelyn. Most people would have given up. I smiled faintly. Robert didn't raise me to give up. He raised me to finish what others start. As we walked toward her car, I saw Marcus standing alone at the bottom of the steps, torn, ashamed, and silent. For the briefest moment, He looked like my little boy again. But I couldn't comfort him, not yet. He had chosen his path. Now he'd have to find his way back. That night, I went home to a house that finally felt safe again. I poured myself a glass of red wine, sat by the fire, and listened to the quiet hum of security cameras still recording. Not out of fear, but out of habit. The war Vanessa started had ended in a courtroom, but the lesson she taught me would last forever. Greed doesn't just steal money, it steals love, trust, and peace. But when you fight back with truth and patience, you take everything back. The days following the court's decision were quiet, almost eerily so. The chaos, the accusations, the constant anxiety that had filled my home for weeks had vanished overnight. Yet, in that silence, I felt a strange emptiness. Victory, I realized, doesn't always come with joy. Sometimes it comes with grief, for what had to be lost to protect what was right. For nearly a week, I didn't hear from Marcus. Not a call, not a message, not even a knock on my door. Linda told me to give him space. He's processing the truth, she said. It's not easy realizing the person you trusted most was using you. Still, every time I passed the family photos on the hallway wall, Marcus's graduation, our first family trip, Robert teaching him how to ride a bike, my heart tightened. That was my son. My boy. And he had almost destroyed everything his father built, because he trusted the wrong woman. It was a Friday evening when the doorbell finally rang. I opened the door to find Marcus standing there, hands buried in his pockets, eyes swollen and tired. The sharpness he'd carried in court was gone. In its place was the boy I remembered, broken, uncertain, but finally real. "Mom," he began, his voice cracking. "Can I come in?" I nodded silently and stepped aside. He walked into the living room, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. The framed photos, Robert's old armchair, the family Bible on the side table. All the pieces of a life he'd nearly traded away. After a long pause, he said quietly, "She's gone. Vanessa. She left the apartment. Took the car, the jewelry, even my laptop. I came home from work and found a note." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to me. The note was short, cold, transactional, and exactly what I'd expected from her. "Marcus, I can't live like this. I didn't marry into poverty or pride. You and your mother made your choice. Now I'm making mine. No apology. No love. Just a clean break." Marcus sank onto the couch, rubbing his temples. "I was so blind, Mom. She told me you hated her. She made me think you were trying to control me, to keep me small. I believed her." I sat beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Love can blind the smartest people, Marcus. But opening your eyes, that's what matters. And you've done that." He looked up, his eyes glassy. "I betrayed you. You were right all along." I shook my head gently. "No, son. You were human. You wanted to believe the best in someone. That's not a weakness, it's just love misplaced." For the first time in months, we talked, really talked. He told me how Vanessa had started controlling everything after the engagement. The bank accounts, his schedule, even who he was allowed to speak to. He confessed that the family advisor, Mr. Allen, had been her connection. A man who'd once helped her ex-boyfriend sue his own parents over inheritance. It made sense now. Every lie, every manipulation, every emotional hook. All part of a plan that she'd probably perfected long before she met Marcus. When he finished speaking, he looked at me and said softly, "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to earn it." I smiled sadly. "You don't have to earn forgiveness, Marcus. You just have to learn from this, and protect what your father built, not because of the money, but because of the values behind it." Over the next few weeks, the pieces of our lives slowly began to realign. Marcus met with Linda to discuss filing for annulment based on fraud and misrepresentation. She handled everything swiftly and cleanly. Within 6 weeks, the marriage was legally erased, as if it had never happened. Vanessa never showed up for any hearings. The rumor, Linda later learned, was that she had fled to Miami with one of her ex-clients, leaving a trail of unpaid debts behind. I wasn't angry. I was grateful. Because her absence gave Marcus closure faster than her presence ever could. By early spring, Marcus moved back into his father's old guest house on my property. Not because he needed shelter, but because he needed peace, the kind only home could give. We began rebuilding our bond in small ways. Morning coffee. Evening walks by the garden. Quiet dinners where laughter slowly returned. One afternoon, while pruning the roses Robert and I had planted decades ago, Marcus joined me. His hands were clumsy with the shears, but his heart was steady. Dad used to say money is just a tool, he murmured. It can build or destroy, depending on who holds it. I smiled faintly. He also said a person's worth isn't measured by what they own, but by what they protect. He looked at me then, really looked, and said, "You protected everything, Mom. Even me." Those words undid me. I didn't cry in court. I didn't cry when Vanessa screamed her threats. But standing there in that garden, hearing my son say that, I felt tears slip down my face. Months passed. Marcus threw himself into his teaching again, eventually publishing a book about ethics in literature. Something Robert would have admired deeply. We even started a foundation in Robert's name, the Carter Scholars Fund, offering scholarships to underprivileged students in the South who wanted to pursue engineering, just like Robert once had. And as the fund grew, I realized something powerful. The fortune Vanessa had tried to steal was now helping rebuild lives, not destroy them. One evening, about a year after the trial, Marcus joined me on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky was painted gold and purple, the same colors that had filled the sky the night Robert proposed to me 50 years ago. Marcus handed me a cup of tea and said softly, "I've met someone. Her name's Grace. She's a librarian. She drives a beat-up Honda and makes her own coffee instead of buying it." I chuckled, wiping a tear. That sounds like a good start. He smiled shyly. "I'm not rushing anything this time." "Good," I said. "Because real love never rushes." As the night settled and the crickets began their soft chorus, I looked up at the stars and thought of Robert. He'd always said, "Wealth is temporary, but wisdom, that's what saves generations." I had protected the money, yes. But more importantly, I had protected our family's wisdom, the belief that integrity outlasts greed, and that love when true cannot be bought. I turned to Marcus and said quietly, "You know, son, the greatest revenge isn't in courtrooms or bank accounts. It's in peace." He smiled, reaching for my hand. "And in redemption." And there, under the wide Georgia sky, mother and son finally found both.